Good evening. This is Professor Aminah Al-Deen, and I am just really enjoying the fact that I am joined by three esteemed chaplains who have agreed to have a conversation with me tonight about university chaplaincy. Dr. Aminah Darwish um, is the Muslim Life Coordinator at Columbia University in New York. She's earned ijazas and traditional Islamic studies certifications from the Qualum Seminary in Dallas and the Critical Loyalty Seminary in Toronto, Ontario, guys. She has also studied individually under different scholars from all over the world. She earned a Ph.D. in chemical engineering before switching careers, and I love this part, to follow her true passion for community building. Omar Bajwa is the director of Muslim life in the chaplain's office at Yale University. He has engaged in religious service, social activism, interfaith engagement, and educational outreach since 2000. His interests include Islam in the United States, interreligious engagement, Islamic global media, and interactions between culture, politics, and spirituality. Hajra Sharif, like last only in this list, is an imam and chaplain. Hajra Sharif holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy and economics, and she has to tell me how those two go together, from Wesley College, and a master's in Islamic studies with both academic and traditional training. She also studied in and visited various Muslim cultures, including Jordan, Malaysia, Palestine, Turkey, and Indonesia. Oh my goodness, such an esteemed group. I should just go over to the side and let you all roll with it. But let me start out with, you know, that chaplaincy has a very deep rooted Christian heritage. And it has only been very recently that others were even considered, right? And Christians, of course, thought they could mentor to anybody, anytime, anywhere, any place. So, what I am going to ask you is, how do you understand that history? Have you taken up the ball of that history, ministering to anybody, anywhere? Or have you decided to minister to Muslim students? You can all answer at once. You can take times. Let's start with Amina.
Bismillah. Assalamualaikum, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with Professor Aminah. I think part of it is just going back to the history of our institutions themselves. Colombia is older than the country itself. There's a long history there with colonialism, with slavery, with just a lot of the dark parts of American history. So just even coming through all of that, we were originally a Christian institution that was graduating Episcopal priests, and now we are a secular university that is trying to figure itself out. And this is just another layer of us trying to figure ourselves out as a country, as an institution. We do a lot of interfaith work. I think it is really important to engage with people of other religions, partially for our own students to learn about other traditions, but also so that we are engaging with the religious tapestry of America. And
Yeah.
sure, the Muslims are the focus for the most part, and all of our programs are, the majority of our programs are Muslim specific programs. But the interfaith space is so rich and so interesting, and I
Yeah.
just really, really love it. The-
Oh, Hajra?
Can you repeat the question, actually?
You know that I'm a very young woman, and I'll forget a question in a minute.
Okay, I do have a sense of what the question was, so I'll just answer that. So you talked about how, chaplaincy originated from the history of the Christian tradition, and while I understand that to be true, it has since evolved to include people of all religious and spiritual traditions. So with respect to Islam, we see that Muslim chaplaincy in the United States began in the prisons as a form of dawah or outreach, and that was something that the Nation of Islam was very much into. But more recently, post 9/11, this work has evolved to focus on interfaith between Muslims and non-Muslims. And I actually like to take it a step further by not only engaging in interfaith, but also multicultural dialogue. Because the difference between the two, in my opinion, is, interfaith kind of focuses on understanding the differences and finding common ground, but multicultural dialogue also, acknowledges power differences and centers historically marginalized voices. So, and that includes Muslim voices. So, in some sense, there is this shift away from needing to prove, our humanity, or that prove that Islam is a peaceful religion, which was kind of the approach taken in the early days of post 9/11. So, in this new space, I found that, in particular in my work, I'm trying to center Muslims a little bit more. And I do that by focusing on three things: strengthening Muslim identity, engaging in multicultural dialogue, and contributing to anti-racist work by countering Islamophobia. So I hope to expand and continue this legacy of, harnessing chaplaincy as a tool for both strengthening Muslim identity as well as engaging in social justice work.
Omar, chime in, please.
Sure. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much to my colleagues and friends. Just fantastic comments. So many threads to sort of tease out there. I'll jump in with sort of two quick points. The first is, I definitely appreciate the beginning of the question is that it's very imperative for us to know the history of the genealogy, rather, of how we got here. So, I've been at Yale for 12, going on 13 years now. My reading of this, Yale also, like Columbia, is an ancient institution, so to speak. And so the genealogy is very much out of the liberal Protestant framework, right? And so just to jump into it, where I see the intersection with our work is by a reading or a study of our tradition, of our own prophetic tradition from the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is that the work of pastoral care is like in the DNA of the ministry of the Prophet, so to speak, right? With sort of at his words, his deeds, literally just the way everything that he cared for and took care of in the community is that I think is work of chaplaincy. And so what we're bringing to it in all of our respective ministries is an inflection of that, right? And so, and the second point that I'll briefly make is that, we have incredible, there are fascinating threads, right, of prison chaplaincy, military, hospital, but we all we're privileged to work in the field of university chaplaincy. So we have incredibly talented, driven, ambitious young Muslims who are going through, as Chaplain Hajra said, issues of exploring their identity. And so we're there to sort of, in the chaplaincy language, walk with them along that journey, right? And be there as friends, as interlocutors, as empathetic listeners, as non-anxious presence, and then, as and when appropriate, really be in deep dialogue, right, with them. And then which was already said beautifully, is that at the same time, the flip side of our chaplaincy work is that we are in many ways the Muslim interlocutor to the broader university community, right? Whether it's about issues of Islam and environmentalism, Islam and human rights, Islam and anti-Black racism work, or anti-racist work. So these are privileged positions that we in fact have. So.
Okay, I want to dig down a little deeper and play the angel's advocate. In this country, we're supposed to have a kind of wall of separation between church and state. Religious institutions, of course, promote religion. Secular institutions, however, are not supposed to support religion. So let me get a little deeper. I don't care if you're Muslim. If you went to a secular school, you're supposed to be there learning biochemical engineering, chasing fruit flies, learning something about history. Your feeding your soul is supposed to happen in another space. Talk to me, chaplains.
I'll just jump in. Thank you very much for the question. I would say that I think that mindset or that line of thinking is common. Like I've heard it many times. What I would gently sort of redirect, instead of saying pushback, is that I think it's not. It's a little bit sort of short-sighted because we're all complex individuals, right? Race, gender, ethnicity, religious identity, spiritual identity,
Right.
linguistic identity. We're all made up of different parts. And to say that we're literally just brains on a stick, right, that walk into a university that are going to absorb this knowledge and walk out after 4 years with a BA or 6 years with a PhD, I think just isn't honest to the human experience. And so we have people that at this very formative intellectual, emotional growth period in their late teens, early 20s, they're going through a lot, right? They're processing, engaging with the world. And people's
Right.
spiritual identity is as important as their ethnic identity, their racial identity. And I think and I will leave it with this, is that I think the part of the beauty of a liberal arts education is actually engaging with that seriously with those ideas, right? Is that people are complex, and liberal arts talk about the human condition, and this is the aspect of the human condition.
Right.
And so
That's great. Hajra, chime in.
Sure. I think that what you were getting at, the separation of church and state, is actually only relevant to public universities. Private colleges,
What?
public universities,
Yes. Yes.
colleges do hire chaplains, and there actually is a way for public, for people, for religious communities to fund their own chaplains at public colleges and universities. And I actually encourage Muslim community to organize and start funding, because, you know, in this space, Muslim students, you know, they don't have a lot of administrative support, people who understand the needs of Muslims, especially in this climate of Islamophobia. And just having an authoritative figure on campus who understands and can advocate for the needs of Muslims is critical for their long-term growth. College years are the formative years of identity, and so not having that support system in place early on can be damaging in the long run for the Muslim community. So I just hope that, you know, we can organize ourselves and start understanding the importance of having a presence on college campuses.
But Aminah,
Yes.
my God, there are over 1,000 faith traditions. Are we going to have a chaplain for each one? Are we going to have authority figures advocating for each one? When is the time for academic learning?
I think for the students to be able to bring their whole selves to campus in the spirit of inclusion, if there's a large enough group of students, they have to be able to have their religious identities just acknowledged. If there's a student that is only eating halal or eating vegetarian food or eating kosher food, if you don't serve it to them and it's not an option at the dining hall, then you're saying you don't get to eat in the dining hall.
But how can we do that for tens of thousands of students? Can universities afford to do that for every dietary wish, every prayer wish, everything? Do they then get out of the business of teaching subjects for careers and professions and cross that line and get into the business of parsing religions?
But this is part of the student's education. A student that graduates from Columbia University who has never in their life engaged with someone that has a different dietary need has missed part of the learning that they should have gotten at a global campus, has missed part of what they, even just understanding. And this is, even with our interfaith dialogue, this isn't about, hey, I'm going to bring a sanitized version of me. No, I'm going to bring my whole self, tell you exactly how I feel. And if I can't do that, then the university is actually not allowing the students to bring their whole selves. The idea of secularism is based on, we're not the default religion that was there. And the default religion that was there was, again, these white male Episcopal priests.
Yeah.
And we need to create the space for everyone else to say, okay, even if we're not choosing one religion, we're still going to acknowledge the existence of the different religions. I think universities that are as big as Columbia we have at least 15 religious life advisors on campus, and I think it's so fascinating. Half of them are different Christian sects, which is also interesting, because when we say we're going to do interfaith work with the Christians, they're like, well, which ones? How do we talk about orthodoxy within even the Christian traditions, and how do we engage? And it just creates for a richer educational experience, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think that
just on that note, I want to jump in with a quick thought. Thank you so much. Is that sort of the way I hear Chaplain Aminah's words are really when we talk about the project of education, is that we want to include in that conversation the idea of religious literacy. So she said it so beautifully, is that if you go through 4 years at a selective institution and you've never had that exposure to difference, I mean, that I think it leaves a lot to be desired in what the faculty and the people who design curriculums are doing in those institutions. Because the flip side is that then we just have professional schools, right? You just have vocational schools. I don't mean to knock that. I think there's definitely a very important place for that. But then we're not calling it a university education, right? That's a very singular track of education where you go and you get sort of a product at the end of it. And I think university education is much engagement. It's about diversity and inclusion. And then the other thing I just want to add in there to Aminah's point is that in our respective institutions, like we're part of the colonial projects in some way, right? Is that Yale is modeled off of Oxford and Cambridge, which were part of the British colonial empire, right? In what they were what they were doing out in the world. And so in many ways, and this is not my expertise, but I put it out there, this is decolonial work, right? Is that we're actually in many ways dismantling these systems of power and oppression, where, like she said, there was once upon a time, not too long ago. I mean, Yale went co-ed 50 years ago. So in 250 years of its history, it was a white male institution, right? So this is imperative now in the moment that we live in, that we reorganize, dismantle, and redistribute power in these institutions.
Okay, we're going to take a few second break here and come back with Hajra to jump in this conversation. Hajra, jump in.
Sure. I just wanted to make one additional point. In the way that you framed your question about, well, can we accommodate for all of these other religions? I'd like to ask, well, where is the inconvenience? Like, why is it such a problem? Accommodating for, the needs of marginalized people.
Well, one reason
positive
you couldn't have class if you accommodated everybody's religious holiday.
Right, but in terms of dietary restrictions, it's very easy to accommodate that. There's not a huge cost to doing something.
Well, it's expensive.
I mean, not necessarily. There's not too many dietary restrictions in general. I mean, buying halal chicken versus normal.
We have vegans. We have vegetarians.
I mean, but that's something that everyone wants.
Go ahead.
Can I jump in to support Hadra's point? I don't want to take the mic from you, Hadra. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But we actually have an example at Yale, if you don't mind me sharing for the good of the group. So several years ago, I was in conversation with Yale Dining, and long story short, they redid their whole strategic plan and business plan. And alhamdulillah, they actually, one of the things was locally sourced, ethically produced, produce and ingredients as much as possible in their dining halls. Part of that plan, they actually found halal meat suppliers that met their strategic points. So the point is that at Yale, in all of its 14 residential college dining halls, we actually have halal chicken as a default, halal chicken and beef on the line, as they say, right? Which is actually meets all of the criteria for all of the different things that they want to look at. But to the other point, and then I'm sorry for Hajra for taking the mic from you, but to
give it back.
Is that we're living in an age now where dining professionals take a lot of this very seriously, where there's every menu item that you go into a dining hall has allergen information, right? If you have shellfish allergy, if you have a peanut allergy, and in many ways that's actually advantageous to religious groups. Is that if you're vegan, if you're vegetarian, if you eat halal, if you want to know if there's alcohol present in an ingredient, most colleges now will actually list that because they care very much about the health and well-being of the students, right? So this, I think, it interacts very well with that. But please, I give the mic back.
Hajra.
Oh, I think we're good with this question, right?
Well, I think one of the things that I've heard is from the workers and trying to tend to what they perceive of is the food of foreigners. And having the cost from students, the cost of meal cards and stuff going up, because then you have many more vendors than you had originally. And for the poor, that's exorbitant. And while it might be nice for those who can afford it, it is not so nice for many minority students who have to pay higher costs as they serve the desires of others.
That's true, but having said that, part of the struggle is at Columbia, a lot of the first gen low income students, a lot of them are Muslims that live in the surrounding areas of the surrounding boroughs in New York. Every incoming freshman is required to be on the dining plan. Yep. And if they are on the dining plan, especially during Ramadan, if they don't get halal food, they're essentially paying for food that they cannot eat. And this is true of a lot of other students. And I'm really, really grateful for the dining staff at Columbia that I think we have 4 Jain students that are on a strict vegan diet, and they get accommodated. Those 4 students, because again, it would have been insane to try to make all of it vegan. So instead, what they did is these specific students have a relationship with the staff, and they essentially give them a heads up before they come into the dining hall.
No, I think those things are always accommodated, but I'm just thinking about the numbers of students whose meal plans I've paid for, because as the meal plans went up to accommodate students from other places, they used their meal cards up very quickly and then were hungry. And I think that smacks a little bit of an elitism, that smacks of a little bit of ethnocentrism, that smacks of a little bit of racism that's not being dealt with here. I think it's nice, but for some, it's not so nice.
I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think it's a fascinating conversation and dimension to all of this, right? Is the economics of higher education, which in some ways totally needs to be, we need to have a hard conversation about why are the costs going up across the board, right? In higher education, where it's actually becoming unaffordable for the majority of people in this country, right? Where, and I'm not an economist, but I read in the Chronicle of Higher Ed and whatnot that, there's,
but this is an economist. Is that, Aster.
Okay. Are we going to get to a point where it's literally we're going to price out the majority of people in the country? Like there has to be a Exactly. But I just want to put something out there for people that I know that work in dining services, is that, we're living in an economy now where people want to have fresher produce, want to have better ingredients, better menus, and all of that. And that coupled with the fact, so costs go up, right? And that they are trying, from the conversations I'm privy to, and I'm very mindful of the fact that I am at a ridiculously privileged and elite institution. Like I put that up front, right? Yale is not, it's the 1%, right? It's not most colleges in the country. But what they try to do in many of these places is they want to give a living wage to their workers, right? And so it gets into complex issues of you have to raise, labor costs go up, which at some level is being filtered down to meal plans, etc. And I know it's more complex than that. Because
but it's also, in addition to the economics, it's back to what all of you have talked about liberal education. You're forcing me, an evangelical Christian, to be mindful of what I serve a Muslim or a Jew or a vegan or whatever else it is running around out there. You see what I'm saying? Because I'm not an automaton serving food. I'm a human being with my own religious proclivities. Hydra, jump in.
Well, I mean, when you mentioned, Christian, these public institutions, they're not funded by Christians. These are public institutions. Therefore, they need to accommodate for the public. It's not about Christians needing to accommodate for non-Christians. It's a public.
But public institutions are funded by many Christian groups.
Right, but when you fund a public institution, your self-interests don't matter at that point.
There's never a time when an American's self-interest don't matter. Never.
I mean, it's not supposed to.
Ah, a little bit different.
It is a public institution and a public good. It has to be serving the public interest, not the specific.
But Muslims are teeny, tiny part.
But it is in the public interest to be accommodating to everyone and creating an open society, because in the long term, this just creates better society. We have to look at the long term, education, etc. They gain in other ways. If you're just fixated on this tiny thing about giving, the small accommodation, we will miss out on like so many other intangible benefits of creating a cosmopolitan culture, etc. And this is the same line of reasoning that people use for whether we should support welfare programs or not. Again, it's about the public good, and then the societal benefits, the intangible societal benefits that.
Exactly. Aminah?
I think because Colombia can actually buy food at bulk, it actually becomes cheaper than some of the food in the surrounding area, except for, of course, the halal cart. The halal cart is always standard the cheapest food that you can get. But apart from that, if you want quality food, the assumption is the Muslim students wouldn't be paying for food anyway. In fact, the university is just taking in those dollars. Their students, apart from the freshmen, because they expect you to buy a ton of meal plans. But for the other students, a lot of the other students, even graduate students, opted into the dining plan because it was cheaper for them per meal than it was to just be eating out in a surrounding area that is very pricey.
Yeah. Well, let's move. What other religious traditions have each of you studied in your role as a chaplain?
Could you repeat the question, please?
What other religious traditions have you studied in depth in your role as a chaplain?
I mean, I'll just jump in real quick, and then I defer to my friends and colleagues here. In my training, I went to Hartford Seminary. I'm a graduate of Hartford Seminary, and so it's originally a Christian institution that has much more of an ecumenical approach now. And so through my graduate work at Cornell, when I was doing a master's in Islamic studies, I took Hebrew Bible, New Testament, and then I went to seminary. So clearly in sort of the Abrahamic family or traditions, I've had exposure. And then in work at Yale, we have on staff, again, because of the nature of how we're very fortunate, is I have a colleague that's a Hindu director of Hindu life and a director of a Buddhist life. And so I have close working relationships with the Buddhist chaplain and the Hindu chaplain. And so in my dozen plus years on the job, I've gotten, I've learned a lot and continue to learn in my work with the Hindu and Buddhist communities on campus.
I agree. I think there's a certain level of privilege that we have that most other people don't, that we can, I have a friend that is a Hindu chaplain that I can call up at any point and ask about any specific thing. I have the same working relationship with Christian, Jewish, and Buddhist ministers that you could call them and just say, hey, this is what's happening. Before we had a Hindu chaplain on campus, I had an Indian student come to my office, and he's Hindu, and he's like, my brown parents are really disappointed in me. I'm like, so are mine. He's like, yeah. And he came in and we had this conversation, because for a lot of our conversations with students, yes, it's somewhat within a religious framework, but just as human beings, there's certain struggles that are very similar.
Yeah.
And there was no point where he felt like I was trying to push Islam on him, nor was he trying to push Hinduism on me. But at the same time, we were trying to find common ground of how can we have a difficult conversation with our parents? How do we do this? Alhamdulillah, my parents have since come around. And it was a fascinating conversation to have with the student. Alhamdulillah, now we do have a Hindu chaplain that he can go to, but I still have a relationship with the student that I don't think I would have otherwise.
Oh, was. That's
Yeah, so I actually have a background in Islamic studies. I've studied Islam for 5+ years. So my concentration obviously is Islam. In terms of studying other religions, I have dabbled, in some readings. I would not claim myself to be an expert, but I've also read in depth the works of Nasser and other perennialist writers, and I think that sort of perspective is beneficial as a chaplain because we're supposed to be speaking widely to people and from a perspective of shared common shared values, shared spiritual wisdom, etc. And it's not so important to be speaking about the particulars of religion when it comes to different religions, but more of how we can unite under these common values. And so my background in these perennialist readings was very helpful in my chaplaincy job. Also, just like others have mentioned, learning on the job, interacting with the other chaplains in an everyday sense, not necessarily in formal interfaith events, but those everyday conversations that you have with people, they really open up windows because you're not going to forget that stuff because it's rooted in experience. Whereas if you read something in a book and you don't have anything to root it in, you could easily forget it. So just having that human connection has been instrumental in me gaining a wider perspective and understanding the other religious traditions.
I think that's great because a lot of people think that the only thing Muslim chaplains do is Muslim stuff,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's important for them to hear that you guys are not toads on the walkway. You're in everything and conferring with your colleagues. Now, Omar, I'm going to take you out of this conversation for a minute, and I'm going to ask the women chaplains. I mean, we have serious issues with women because, Omar, of men all over the Muslim world. Now you show up as chaplains with jobs, draw salary, with authority, with responsibility. Talk to me, ladies.
I think my first week on campus, I had four of the male students ask me when we were going to hire a khatib. And the first one, I was like, well, I just started. The second one, I was confused. The third one, I was like, if you're asking if we're hiring a man, it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
And alhamdulillah, to their credit, those same 4 students came around and started attending halaqas and became involved in a way that I was very grateful. And they didn't just dismiss me just offhand. There are some students that would, but at the same time, I feel like it gave me space to have conversation. There are a lot of women that have been disenfranchised from the Muslim community, and it gave me a very, put me in a really good position to try to bring them back in. And I remember actually in the last month, I think I had 3 different women of different ages and of very different experiences that said this was the first time that they have felt that Islam could be for them, that Allah could love them.
Yeah. Isn't that something? All the Muslims are men and the women, I don't know what they do. Hajra.
Yeah, so this is actually why I entered into chaplaincy to begin with. I studied Islam and I was looking for something to do with it, right? Like if I was a man, you could, try to be an imam at a mosque or, get invited to speak at things. And there's lots of opportunities, but for a woman, it's so much more difficult. And so this was, one of the few outlets for, someone like myself. And of course, there are, challenges, like Aminah said, in terms of your legitimacy being questioned. That's something that I had to deal with kind of on the first day. And also just questions about leading prayer and all of these things. It's, how do you deal with those questions? And, where you decide to, what stance you decide to take can have real world consequences, right? You might divide your community, but at the same time, you need to stand up for social justice and women. So, where is the balance, right? And sometimes you might decide that, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to lead this prayer or whatever. And even if you disagree with me, you're going to, I hope that we can, create a culture of tolerance, because the inconvenience that the majority experiences because, they see something new or something new is happening is not even close to the the benefit that those marginalized people can gain if they go outside of the grain and do things that are counter the culture. So yeah, and that's actually why I go by the name Imama as well as chaplain, because authority is granted through these titles, and so if you don't use these titles, you're in some sense diminishing your own authority. And I have had just as much training as some of these other people who are calling themselves imams and sheikh or whatever, and so I don't have a title. Like, why is that? So that's why I use also this title of Imama, and I think Aminah uses that as well.
One of my male students actually started Imamina, which I thought was hilarious. It kind of stuck.
I love it. I love it, ladies. I'm going to use it and push it out there. I think one of the things on many campuses, and especially with, I'm going to put this out there and then we're going to take another quick break, is the diversity of students. African American Muslim students have often felt left out, as have Chinese Muslim students, as have, well, not so much white Muslim students, but Latino Muslim students. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that, and we're going to go to break. I think I beat him in terms of taking a station break. But nevertheless, your comments. What can we do to change this dynamic?
I think we have to embed it in our programming. We made a point to make sure that at least one speaker every year that we invited was Black. At least one speaker that we invited every year was Shia, to make sure that the students see themselves represented also in the religious authority. We also did a program called, this is our signature program, it was called Ramadan Around the World, and it's the first time that Ramadan is going through the school year. And it was so much fun, because what we did is we had the cultural groups each take an iftar where they are dressing up if they want, they are talking about their culture, and they're ordering food from their specific culture. And we had someone be like, oh yeah, of course Colombia has the money to do this. And I'm like, look, jollof rice is not more expensive than biryani. It's just not.
Right.
We are just going out of our way to make sure that different cultures are celebrated. The Black student organization, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, attended we had a Somali night, a Senegalese night, and an African-American night where we ordered soul food. And we're lucky enough to be in New York where you can just order food from everywhere.
Yeah.
But the students were coming because this was a space where their culture was celebrated in a positive and affirming way. And it was part and parcel of an iftar where the Somali students are talking about their historical traditions regarding Ramadan. The Shia students did the same thing, where we had the Irani night and they were eating kubida and we're drinking like saffron tea. Like, everybody is really enjoying the iftar.
Right.
But we heard the Shia Adhan for the first time for a lot of the students. We broke fast a little later. If you are unfamiliar with these traditions, maybe college should be the time that you experience it at least once in your life, at least once a year, that you see the beautiful tapestry of the American Muslim community in a way that is fun, that is engaging, that just results in really good food. Alhamdulillah.
Jump in.
Muslims are food, right? So, I mean, I just want to jump in with what Chaplain Aminah was saying, is that, she articulated so beautifully with actually concrete examples. What came to my mind to your question is really, this is the work of DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we need to be deeply engaged and on the ground in that kind of work with our partners on campuses, people that work in cultural centers, people that work in student affairs, people that work in religious affairs, as equal contribution partners and interlocutors, right? Saying that we absolutely need to create the space for the Latinx community on campus, for the Native Indigenous community on campus, for the Black community on campus, just like we need to have centers for Muslim life, spaces of Muslim life. And in that way, we're blessed if we take our work seriously, to have like such an incredibly, and that word is so beautiful, the tapestry of the beauty of the Muslim world, is that we represent the most multicultural, right, and most multi-ethnic religious community, arguably, on a college campus in 2020, right, in terms of like just the kind of engagement we have, the levels of engagement, the diversity within our communities that come, and this has been mentioned before, but that's what I think is that we have, if we rise to the occasion and take our work seriously, and I'll be the first one to point at myself as needing to do better, is that it can be transformative work. So that's what I would kind of thoughts that come to mind to your question. And on the previous question, I very much appreciate the how we need to grapple with the gender issues head on, and so I'm happy. I want to listen more than speak on that.
Hajra.
Yeah, so I agree, with everything that was said, and Aminah, what you said about representing different ethnicities and different genders in the speakers that are invited, and I think the MSA has done a great job with that. But what I do specifically as a chaplain, because what the MSA does is not what I do necessarily, is that I make it a point to reach out to Shia, Black Muslims, or anyone else who may be marginalized in the community. And I spend time talking to them in office hours and building a relationship with them, because I want to make sure that they have a support system, when they need it. And so, and that just helps make them feel a little bit more, welcome and accepted in the Muslim community. I just make it a point to like go out of my way and make sure that they have that personal relationship with me, so that if something happens in the MSA or in the greater Muslim body, they have someone to turn to and they're not alone. So that's specifically what I do.
Okay, I want to turn to the more sensitive side. Still, Aminah gave me that look. Okay, so sex before marriage, pornography, the alphabet crowd. My parents have driven me to my wits' end. I've been bullied and I might commit suicide. How are we to deal with these things, which are also a part of that maturation process? Don't everybody jump at once.
I mean, I always have a lot to say, and I talk too much, so I don't want to be the first one to jump in.
Oh,
but
we know how to shut you up, Omar. Don't worry. Just go for it.
I will. No, thank you. What I would say is one of the things that comes to mind, and then I'll hand it over, is that really our training equips us, or should equip us, to listen more than we speak, right? Especially in the beginning. And part of the essence of what it means to be a chaplain, to be a pastoral presence, is to be a non-anxious, non-judgmental presence on campus in these students' lives, because we're well aware of all the things that you mentioned, the reality of contemporary culture, right? That our young people are faced with this onslaught, right? And we can unpack that at so many levels, but we want to be ideally, inshallah, the person in life or the group of people in their life that when they walk through the door, we meet them where they're at, right? That we sit down, we listen, we ask reflective questions, we ask deep questions, and do we do deep listening? And so we kind of walk on that journey with them, not necessarily providing answers, but kind of part of it is helping them come through unpacking these issues themselves, right? That's what I would lead with. And then there's some people you build a longer relationship with, and they want you to actually help them untangle these kind of problems, and they be looking for answers. So it really depends on the type of student and the type of crisis that they're in.
Anybody else?
I think there's two parts to this. So there was a recent study about, I think more than 50% of Muslim youth and Muslim college students have had premarital sex, have tried alcohol, more than half of our Muslim students in a post 9/11 world were bullied at school, issues of substance abuse. These things exist in the larger Muslim community at very high rates, and we have to acknowledge that they are part of our communities as well. There was a beautiful story of a companion at the time of the Prophet ﷺ that kept showing up to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ drunk. And I can't picture someone showing up to our masjid looking like that, because the rest of the Muslim community would just attack them. And there
Yes.
was during this time, one of the other companions, he started speaking ill of this man. And the Prophet ﷺ got angry at him and he said he has to fight the shaitan and he has to deal with you. Don't support the
Mhm.
shaitan against your brother. He is
Yeah.
here because he loves Allah and his Prophet. So the notion that there's wal'iyadu billah, may Allah protect us from this idea that there's ever going to be a sin that is beyond the mercy of Allah is just ridiculous. It's a
Yeah,
very,
but it's there.
and it's so unfortunately rampant in this part of the religious crowd of like, okay, I didn't commit this sin, therefore how dare you?
Yeah.
And it comes from a space, unfortunately, of spiritual malice, of being more obsessed with someone else's sin over my own. Just because Allah hid my sin doesn't mean that I have a right to attack someone else, and to not try to understand how and why they ended up, what led them to this, and how we can help people heal. A lot of the times these are based in maybe unresolved trauma or based in an experience that they still need to understand and process.
Right.
And it's part of our job, to Chaplain Amar's point, to just be that pastoral presence to help them through. Actually, there was a point where I had to put up, like, almost try to communicate to my students. I'm like, you don't confess your sins to me. That's not the point. The point is where have you been so that we can walk along this journey together.
Hajra?
Yeah, so I would actually echo some of the sentiments that Umair mentioned already in terms of, centering listening, right? And making sure to build a relationship with students. Sometimes if you try to give advice prematurely, it can backfire. You don't know where that student is. You don't know what their orientation is. There's so much diversity in Islam. There are Muslims who, take the position that having a boyfriend or girlfriend before marriage is halal. And so you do need to respect, other people's perspectives. And as a chaplain, we're sort of, supposed to be more in this neutral space. But at the same time, we are counselors, we give counsel. And so being able to strike that balance is hard, and you just need to have like a really great relationship with that person to know where that balance is. Sometimes you might feel that, okay, you can tell this person, your opinion of what you think Islam would say because you think they will accept that nasiha. For others, you might not be able to, and you just have to, be more respectful and tolerant of where they're coming from. And if they're, not interested in your perspective, maybe, give them resources on, other perspectives that might be in line with where they're at. So,
well, you all are so mature in your professions that I would be remiss if I didn't call you back again, because some of the things you're talking about, parents need to know also. Because they're riding these kids like, what's that dude's name on the horse in the Wild Wild West, trying to protect them from everything, but riding them so hard, they're driving them to stuff. I'm going to give you all the last say because my merciless producers are telling me that I have to go away. So I'm going to give you all the last say, and we'll start with Hajra.
So just last comments.
Yeah.
Okay. So just, the points that I want to reiterate is just, I hope that Muslim community understands the importance of chaplaincy to begin with, especially on educational spaces. There's just so much Islamophobia right now. So many, we are a marginalized community. Our Islam is, at odds. Sometimes some aspects are at odds with, greater cultural norms, and just having that a mentor in an authoritative space on campus just would make, the biggest difference in students' lives. So that's number one. Number two, I think the Muslim community needs to be open to listening to the perspectives of women and, the challenges they face in religious leadership positions. Sometimes, there is this fear of like westernization or, imperialism, whatever. So feminism or women's rights sometimes are rejected on those grounds. you know.
Yeah.
So I just hope that we can create a greater culture of listening and realizing that even Muslims who, you know the tradition or religiously committed, you know, they might see things differently. Muslim women, right? It might not be an issue of westernization. This issue of, you know, woman leadership in religious positions, you know, is a challenge that Muslim women who are authentically Muslim are facing. And so we should give more space to listening to them. And then
I'm going to have to stop you
Yeah.
so I can give a minute to each of our other guests.
okay, of course.
I wanted to say that college is the time in people's lives when, for the first time, you're away from your parents, and it's up to you to either choose Islam for yourself or not. And we see great Muslim leaders, people like Congressman Keith Ellison, who is now the Attorney General of Minnesota, and really just how important his role is in the current moment that we're experiencing. He became Muslim in college. What we're building is the roots for Muslim Americans in college. And what's incredible about the chaplain space is it actually does include women, includes Shia chaplains, it includes Black chaplains, it really just celebrates the tapestry of the Muslim American community in a way that everybody is part of the Ummah and celebrated and still fighting the same good fight for each other. And it's so beautiful.
Thank you. Last word, Omar. 1
Subhanallah,
minute.
you did the last. I can't follow what they said. I'm simply going to put out there that, you know, from where I'm coming from, I think, you know, the life of the Prophet, right? And so how can we, in our capacities as chaplains on campuses, embody and exemplify, right, that prophetic love and mercy and compassion that he gave not only to the Sahaba, but to the world, right, to the Ummah. And so in our small slice that we inhabit on college campuses, and inshallah beyond, is that we have a responsibility to nurture hearts and to embody that mercy. And I think that's really at the heart of our work. As my amazing colleagues have already said and demonstrated, it's about relationship building. Thank you.
I'm going to end with that I'm bringing all of you back. And what I would like for you to do, and I will chase you down, have no fear. What I would like to talk about more pointedly is Islamophobia, college administrators, and Muslim chaplaincy programs. So if you would think about those things, and I will be on your email shortly. This is Critical Talk with Professor Aminah Al-Deen. I have had a wonderful evening, and I forgot the word already, but to the ladies, I am so glad to see you. Omar, I'm glad to see you again after a while. And you all have just been wonderful. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.